You're listening to Kate Palmer from SparkleTart.com. Today I'm going to show you how to create a beautiful soft dotted background to complement your Copic coloured images. I'm using an image created by Elizabeth Bell that's sold by Sweet Pea Stamps. This one is called Teenie Tiny and it's one of the Twinkle Toes collection.
So what I've done is I've coloured up my image, and for my background I've got a series of colours that are from the same colour family but much paler. So I have G12, RV000, VO1 and G000.
Plus E41 to bring in a little of the brown tones, and of course my Copic colourless blender.
So what I like to do is start with my palest colours and do a quick, basically little dots all over the background.
I've started with the G000, which is my very palest colour. And it's really easy to get lazy at this step, especially after you've done a few dots. It gets worse as you do more and more layers. You can also see that my G000 started running at this point. It means it puts out more ink than it should. You just take the cap off the other end and leave it sit horizontally for about 10 minutes with both caps off, and it sort of re-equalizes the pressure in the marker. So if yours starts sort of running and ink's leaking out of it, take the caps off and let it re-equalize. Now at this point I've done about half, and I'm going to swap over to my RV000. Again, this is one of my palest colours. Now what I mean by it's easy to get lazy is that the nicest dots are made when you're holding your marker at a 90-degree angle to the paper, so nice straight up and down. You get beautiful even dots that are little circles. When I say it's easy to get lazy, I mean that it's easy to hold your marker at a bit of an angle. The more dots you make and the more of this you do, the more you're inclined to move your hand a little, because it's easier to hold the marker on a bit of an angle. So what happens is you'll end up making marks that are not little circles, they're kind of half ovally kind of things. So just keep an eye on yourself as you're adding the dots, and just keep rechecking that you're holding the marker at a 90-degree angle. You'll end up with a much finer dotted background that way.
Now, I particularly like doing this on fantasy images because it gives a really sort of cool magical looking background.
Basically, I've just been jumping between the G and the RB colours, adding a pale background across the entire piece of cardstock. It gives a really good base for those darker colours.
Now basically I stick to sort of like the same shading techniques for this as I do for the image. So for this image, because the sun is coming from that direction, this will be much, well, it'll be a little bit darker, and this side will be a little bit paler. Now moving to my darker colours, this one is G12.
But how do you make a pale background look darker? Well, what I mean by that is you either add more of the darker colours to the side that would be darkest, or you add smaller, tinier, more densely packed dots, and this makes it look darker. And I usually choose to add the more dots.
And I still will add this darker colour to this other side here, but I definitely won't use as much. And I won't make it tightly grouped like I did on the other side. And so this would be what I call tightly grouped, and this is definitely more sparse.
So basically the density of those dots gives the illusion of weight to what you're looking at and makes it look darker. So even though it's using all the same colours, one side will look darker. I'm now moving to VO1, which is my darkest colour. It's also a colour I've used in actually colouring my fairy, so I need to be a little bit careful about where I put it. It's one of the colours I've used on the wings. If I make it too dark or too close, then it's just going to look like the wings have bled into the background, and that's really not what I want. So to make sure this doesn't happen, I'm being very careful, making sure my dots are distinct, are individual, and are as circular as I can make them. You'll also notice I haven't put a lot of the same colour dots, the VO1, directly next to the wings, but I've been really careful that none of them sneak over the image. You might also notice at this point I'm making sure I have much larger dots on the opposite side.
And I'm just going to go back and add another layer of the two lightest colours, so that's the RB 000 and the G 000. I'm just pressing down a little bit harder this time so that the ink kind of floods onto the cardstock underneath. I've already got a layer of those fine little spots. Now it's time to kind of start blending and making my background a bit. So just press down a little harder on the nib. That makes bigger marks.
These larger marks will eventually help blend those colours. You won't really get sort of like a single colour background, but it helps blend them into each other. Also, having the small dots and the larger dots really helps make that background look more interesting.
Okay, and then it's the same with a layer of the G 000.
So just to recap, we've added a layer of fine dots in each of our colours, or almost each of our colours, and then we're going over and adding a layer of larger dots just to help the colours blend and look a bit more interesting pattern-wise.
So when you get up close, you can see I've got a layer of little spots at the moment that just kind of go all the way around my image. So you might even add a little bit of the colour from the mushroom, so I'm going to add a bit of E41.
Now the reason I'm adding in that E41 is so that the image and the background look more natural. They've got the same quality of light. So if the background was really pale or really bright, it wouldn't really match the image that I've coloured. So in adding this little bit of colour from the image, I've made it look more together.
Now I've got my blender. And I'm just going to tap a layer of the blender over that whole background. Again, do spots. Don't rub it over. Do little spots. You'll get a better pattern and a better finish if you've dotted the blender on like you've dotted the colours. And just be careful when adding the blender around the coloured image. You don't want to get too much on there and sort of bleach out your colours. Now you will need to do a few layers of the blender. And so what the blender does is it bleaches out some of the colour, pushes the colours together, and it just sort of moves it around on the paper. So it takes it from looking like a background full of individual unique spots
to something that looks much more unified and much prettier.
But it does take a few layers of the blender to achieve that. It doesn't all just happen at once. Now the reason that you can't just sort of scribble over with the blender pen or draw lines or even just do scrubbing circles is because when you do that it scrubs the colours and you won't get that nice sort of dotty magical background. In dotting on the blender you get a much better pattern than you would doing it any other way.
Now if you'd like to see for yourself the difference here, on a piece of scrap Copic cardstock, scrub a bit of a nice dark colour and then try making spots on that with the blender, and then next to it try using a scrubbing motion or even blending circles, and you'll see the different patterns that are created. And it doesn't matter if it's dark or light colours, these are the same patterns that you'll achieve. So give that a go and see what I mean. Now adding all of these dots is a bit of a tedious process. You will get a nicer pattern, but it takes a bit of persistence. I ended up adding 3 different layers of dots with the blender to get the background that I've achieved. If you don't have the patience for that, and you're okay with getting something as a similar result but not quite the same, flip over to the chiseled tip on your Copic Colourless blender and use that to make sort of little blending circles. It won't be quite as pretty or quite as subtle, but it will still look nice. There are quite a few ways to do this particular technique. This is how I like to do it, to create soft, subtle, magical kind of backgrounds. There are also techniques out there for making really dark, dense backgrounds. They're fun to watch too, but this is how I like to do it. For me, I've actually done 3 layers of the dots. I had a break in the middle because it does get a bit hard on the hands. And as you can see, I'm really kind of smushing the tip into the background there. That's okay, the tip's flexible, it'll be fine.
Alright, so I've done another couple of layers, and it really has taken the dots down into the background rather than sort of standing out. Now I've got some Distress ink in antique linen here, and one of the little foam applicator pads thingies, whatever you'd like to call it. And what I do is ink up the little pad, wipe it on the craft mat a little bit, and then ink over my image.
I ink all of the edges and then in towards the image just a little bit to bring it all together. Now that the ink has been applied to the edges, I like to take a water brush and just blend the ink towards the inside of the fairy. Now it's not going to bother the Copic markers because they're waterproof, and it just helps blend the colours a little better. Our backgrounds turned out to be extremely subtle. You've got all of the individual colours, but going over with the antique linen just helps tone it down a little bit. It really makes the fairy pop.
You can see I've got my Copic airbrushed background just peeking through here. I've embellished with some magic mesh just sort of diagonally over the card. I've used this wonderful little word charm, and of course I've embellished with a spring bouquet of I Am Roses, all sprayed with Lindy's Stamp Gang sprays, and I've got a coordinating sort of slightly paler version in the top corner. I've used a Tim Holtz corner here and changed the colour with some of the brand new Distress paint, and I've got a few other little embellishments hiding around the place. Now I've mounted this onto a piece of craft card because it just seemed to match the colours in the mushroom. So you can see this wonderful little tile down here, and above that it says treasure. So I'm reading it as fragile treasure, which for me that little fairy is. So I've got this wonderful palette of coloured flowers. And for me, this is just a total spring bouquet. It's got soft lilacs, purples, pinks, soft pale blues. It's just made specifically to complement the fairy, and the way I've done that is by using colours that are the same colour palette but are a little bit greyer or more pastel. If you get up close and have a look at the fairy, you can see the transparent wings and how pretty and natural that hair looks. Now you can see that wonderful soft background I've achieved with the dotting technique, and I think that really makes those images stand out, the fact that the background is so soft and subtle. Now you can see what I've done here on the top of the little mushroom for the effect of sort of dimples or drops. You can still see the little mouse hiding in the corner up here.
For a little bling, I've got the
At You Copic sticker on the flower, just here, a little bit on the mushroom, and of course on her pendant. You can see the pendant glittering away there. And that's how I finished off my card using the beautiful stamp from Elizabeth Bell, created for Sweet Pea Stamps. So I hope you've enjoyed watching this. I certainly enjoy creating these and sharing them with you.
Thanks so much for watching, and have a wonderful day. Bye.